The focus of the hunt for Challenger debris narrows. The attention is on an area where sonar has detected large objects underwater. 3 robot submarines are being used to check it out. NASA wants to know if those large objects are part of the cabin of the ill-fated space shuttle.
This is Daybreak for Monday, February 3rd, 1986, with Mark Walton in Washington and Molly McCoy and Patrick Greenlaw in Atlanta.
Good morning. NASA officials say most of the floating debris from Challenger has been salvaged. Now investigators want any remnants that might have settled on the ocean floor.
It is evidence that NASA needs to determine why the shuttle blew up last Tuesday, killing the 7 astronauts aboard. CNN's Brian Nelson is at the Kennedy Space Center this morning with an update on that investigation. Brian?
Good morning. It has now been 6 days since the Challenger tragedy, a tragedy which plunged this nation into mourning for the 7 crew members. And had things turned out a little differently and had the craft launched safely last Tuesday, today was the day the Challenger and its crew members were due to come home. But as we know, that is not the way things turned out. Increasingly, attention is now focused on the right-hand solid rocket booster of the shuttle Challenger. With more on that and the investigation, here is CNN's John Holloman.
Space scientists are pointing to the solid fuel rocket booster on the right side of the orbiter as the point of greatest concern in the shuttle explosion. The booster is joined to the orbiter with a metal connector called an attach ring, and the booster is connected together with rings between each of the 4 sections. Both the administrator of NASA and private rocket scientists agree. Meanwhile, a November investigation into an accident inside the vehicle assembly building here involving the left side rocket booster criticized workers for failing to handle rocket parts properly.
That was a booster segment that had arrived here at Kennedy Space Center, was being initially processed, and there was a large or a loud cracking noise heard during that operation, and there was a subsequent investigation of that. Now that segment was not used. It was originally targeted for this launch vehicle, the 51L launch vehicle, but it was not used.
The report charges the workers performed tasks they were not trained to do. They lifted critical parts with cranes that didn't work properly. They ignored procedure, and they failed to report problems as they came up.
My experience with all the workers at the Kennedy Space Center is we've got one of the most professional groups of people here that you could ask for anywhere in the world.
The November problem was found and corrected, and all the evidence we've seen so far points to the right side engine as the most likely cause for the explosion.
Since it's shown its basic reliability in the first 24 flights, we don't think there's a major reconfiguration problem here. We think there's an engineering problem somewhere that has to be taken care of.
NASA Administrator Graham says the shuttle design is fundamentally sound, and the program will be resumed sooner than we think. But scientist Flandreau says flights should not be resumed until NASA replaces critical pressure sensors in the rockets, sensors removed to save weight.
There were some extra sensors that were meant to analyze the solid rocket motors that were removed in this flight. I think of the order of 10,000 pounds of equipment was removed.
Why would they take them off?
Well, this is really mainly to allow more payload to be carried by the shuttle.
Is it something that you're calling for, or that you have advocated should be put back on, even at the cost of 10,000 pounds?
Well, I think there were some earlier questions about the operation of these rocket motors that could have been answered by some careful measurements in flight.
Out in the Atlantic, the search for debris is yielding less and less. NASA officials theorize that most of the shuttle remains have sunk to the bottom, and the underwater search will take much more time. John Holloman, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral, Florida.
That recovery effort will continue today, but as John Holloman reported, this may be the last day of sustained search efforts. Last night, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter, the Dallas, returned carrying some pieces of wreckage, including what appears to be a fuselage, or piece of fuselage, or wing. If you notice, it has a large gaping hole in the middle. However, the total recovery yesterday was so small, the Coast Guard may decide today to drastically scale down the search. Much will depend on today's efforts. There's one significant find yesterday, a 10,000-pound piece of debris believed to be part of one of Challenger's solid rocket boosters. It was found yesterday, or I should say Saturday, 100 miles off of Savannah, Georgia, and returned here to the Cape yesterday. Yesterday, memorial services across the country were held to honor the 7 Challenger crew members. With more on that now, CNN's Sasha Fu.
A day of Sunday prayers was a day of common prayer, of common mourning, and of common remembrance for 7 uncommon Americans.
This week has been a week of sorrow, but it's been also a week of healing and togetherness. A little bit of all of us was on the Challenger. It was the inborn sense of adventure that knows no political boundaries or personal grievances the world over.
The Baptist church near Houston was the same one where Shuttle Commander Francis Scobee had come on many Sundays to worship with his family. Shuttle astronaut Ellison Onizuka did not worship in a church, but in a Buddhist temple. But with his crewmates, Onizuka did share one faith in pushing heavenward toward the frontiers of space. A memorial service was held at this Los Angeles temple Sunday. Parishioners at St. Paul's Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, came to remember astronaut Ron McNair, who attended the church while a student at MIT. In a visit to the church last fall, McNair told his friends that when he went up in the Challenger, the 7 astronauts would be joined by an 8th, Jesus. And in New York, St. Patrick's Cathedral, a prayer to remind us that man's designs are not the measure of God's.
The suddenness of the death of the astronauts does indeed shock us, and yet without demeaning their glory. Such happens every day all around us, reminding us that each one of us is vulnerable.
There are laurels for heroes. Bouquets of flowers Sunday brought my mourners to the gates of the Johnson Space Center. And a living memorial to the dead was planted in downtown Houston, 7 holly trees in the city's Tranquility Park. In one of the nation's most famous parks, New York Central Park, a cannon sounded, sundering the quiet 7 times. Sasha Fu, CNN.
In about an hour's time, we're expecting a briefing and update on the work of the Interim Review Board studying the Challenger accident. CNN will carry that briefing live at 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning. This is Brian Nelson, CNN, reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center.
Brian, could you just bring us up to date on one thing? Is there any debris that has been found so far that would corroborate what the investigators hypothesized may have been the cause as far as what they've seen from the pictures of the possible leak in the SRB? Is there anything in the physical evidence that might substantiate that?
Patrick, there's none that I know of. Most of the debris is being quarantined down at the Canaveral Air Station, and we do not have access to it except for some pictures through a long lens which we use in our cameras. That's the only access we have, and they have not confirmed any of the pieces so far. All we can tell is that they appear to be pieces of fuselage or pieces of wing or pieces of solid rocket booster, but we have no confirmation that the pieces of solid rocket booster that have been found so far will lend any clues as to why there appeared to be that plume of smoke that we've all seen on the photographs showing the liftoff.
Okay, Brian Nelson reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center. Thank you very much. And of course, he and his colleagues will be standing by live there today. And as he said, there will be a press briefing. And of course, he'll have details on that throughout the day.
America pays tribute to the 7 men and women who died in the Challenger disaster.
This is Day Watch for Monday, February 3rd, 1986, with Mark Walton in Washington, Bob Kane and Marianne Laughlin in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
The Space Agency is at this hour about to begin a news conference at Kennedy Space Center. Our correspondent Brian Nelson is there. We're going to join the news conference now live.
From the Coast Guard, during 6 days of searching, Coast Guard, Navy, Air Force, and NASA vessels and aircraft have recovered over 11 tons of debris. 28 ships have searched 30,000 square nautical miles of ocean. 11 aircraft have flown 260 hours, searching 60,000 miles. The search areas for today have been expanded as debris drifts and disperses. 20,000 square nautical miles will be searched today by 10 Coast Guard and Navy ships and 15 Coast Guard, Navy, Air Force, and Marine aircraft. Helicopters will search from Cape Canaveral north 60 miles to Flagler Beach. Fixed-wing planes will search from Flagler Beach north 180 miles to Charleston, South Carolina. I have a list of the units which will participate if anybody's interested in that. Sightings and recovery of debris yesterday declined in the area from Cape Canaveral north to St. Augustine. However, sightings were made further north. Track spacings for today's search have been widened to cover a greater area, but with less concentration. And that's all of the new information I have. We're trying to get additional information about the area that the submersibles were looking in last night. I have not yet received it. If there's any questions that I can answer, I'll be happy to try and do that. And start with Jay Barbary, NBC News.
Can we expect today that if they do find something there on the floor and you recover it, that we're going to be told about it? Everybody is very interested in the large object.
Yes, I understand, okay. And as soon as something is recovered and identified by NASA, then we expect that we'll be able to release that.
Okay, it will be NASA. It's not coming through the Coast Guard. We're told you're in charge of it. It will be your office releasing it. Correct?
Right.
Okay.
The Al Salestead from Baltimore Sun.
In connection with that large object, Hugh, is NASA still of the opinion expressed a few days ago that that's all you know about it? It is simply a sonar indication of a large object, or do you have any other kind of information that would suggest it's something more, that you could be more specific about it?
No, I don't have any additional information. We are trying to get that, but as far as I know, that has not been brought up, and at the moment, all as we have is the soundings. We'll try to, as soon as we get something, we'll try to let you know. Harry Rosenthal.
Is this the extent of the information we're going to get daily, the fact that they met and they're going to meet again? Or are you going to tell us something that we can use for a story? What can you do with this?
We're going to try and tell you what the board is doing. However, the board is not going to release what they're looking at, what their thoughts are, any premature speculation on what it might be. The board goes through a very meticulous examination of everything, and until they have pinned it down, I don't imagine that they're going to release anything that pinpoints cause, effect, or anything. However, as I mentioned, Jess Moore will be meeting with you this week, and he can tell you as much as he can at that time about what the board is doing. Howard Benedict, and then way in the back.
Hey, you say Jess will meet with us this week. What day are you looking at?
Don't have a specific day. He agreed that he would do that, and as soon as he's set his schedule for the week, we'll know. Bruce Hall.
Hugh, we've heard about the large object that you've been looking at. We've heard about several other objects on the ocean floor. Have you recovered any item at all from the ocean floor?
Not that I'm aware of.
Were you able to identify yet the large cone that you brought in by helicopter yesterday, the large orange cone?
Yeah, I have not heard, any identification of that. Everybody saw that, I believe, but I don't have that. And actually, I really can't answer anything other than pretty much logistics questions. I don't have anything substantive other than what I've mentioned at the moment. We're trying to
Are we wrapping on camera?
Additional information this morning.
Hugh, is there an indication whether or not we're going to get any more video or still photographs released today?
Well, it hasn't been a very productive briefing here at the Kennedy Space Center. The journalists who were expecting a good deal of information on both the work of the Interim Review Board and the search for debris have not come away with a lot of information this morning so far. Spokesman Hugh Harris from NASA says the search effort has so far recovered 11 tons of debris, and today the search effort is covering 20,000 square miles. When he was asked about a large undersea object that was detected by sonar about 4 to 5 days ago, what has been found, has it been detected, salvaged, Mr. Harris would only say that they will release some information when that object has been detected, recovered, and identified. It's believed it could be the crew quarters for the Shuttle Challenger, but again, that is only speculation at this point. And the only thing NASA has to go on, they say, are the sonar readings. And again, once again, about the Interim Review Board, whose work journalists are particularly interested in knowing, NASA says only that we will get a briefing on their work, perhaps sometime later this week. A measure of the frustration here when one of the reporters asked, what can we do with this? This is Brian Nelson, CNN, reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center.
Thank you, Brian. Ships have pulled large pieces of the wreckage out of the water, but the Challenger cabin is still missing. 2 ships and a 3rd robot submarine will be joining the search today. At the Kennedy Space Center, as you know, investigators are trying to pinpoint the cause of the explosion. And one NASA film that shows a plume of flame on the shuttle's rocket booster could be a key. CNN's Al Sunshine reports.
The Interim Review Board is reportedly so confident that a failure in the shuttle's solid rocket booster set off Challenger's fiery end that NASA officials are, for the first time, talking about resuming America's shuttle program. The plume of 6,000-degree flame seen coming off the right side booster comes from an area where solid rocket components are joined together. NASA photographs diagram the so-called booster field joint that is put together inside the shuttle's vehicle assembly building. While NASA refuses to speculate on what caused the failure, spokesmen are saying they believe the design of the shuttle system is sound, having flown 24 earlier successful flights. The investigation is apparently looking at a possible manufacturing or assembly defect of Challenger's booster rocket.
I'm optimistic from what I've heard the administrator say, and also from my past evaluation of many problems in missiles, that we are going to find a component type problem or a manufacturing type problem, and not going to find a basic design problem. After all, we've had 24 successful flights, 52 million miles in space, and the components have received untold amount of scrutiny up until this time.
While pieces of Challenger's wreckage continue to arrive back to Cape Canaveral, NASA officials are now discussing the possibility of getting the shuttle program back into the air.
If there's not a basic design flaw, it's a component or a manufacturing defect or even a human operator error, we would stand a very good chance of having a flight by the summertime or later.
While NASA's review board may be closing in on a solid rocket booster failure as the cause of Challenger's explosion, NASA spokesmen say they expect it will still take full congressional hearings to give the shuttle program a green light and get it back off the ground. Al Sunshine, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center.
The Challenger shuttle crew was honored over the weekend with a cannon salute in New York City's Central Park, a shot fired for each of the 7 crew members. The city's mayor, Ed Koch, said a brief prayer during the ceremony. In downtown Houston yesterday, trees were planted in memory of the crew. The American hollies stand in Tranquility Park as a living memorial to the crew. Mayor Kathy Whitmire and city council members planted the trees.